All right, so hello and welcome to another webinar organized by SciNote. My name is Clement, I'm CEO of SciNote, and I'm really excited about today's webinar on how to first choose a correct electronic lab notebook for your lab, and then also how to successfully implement this. This is a topic that has been really important for all our customers from our start, but especially so in the current times where we see that digital technologies offer at least some sort of solution and can help with science being operational. We have seen this in the past year, a lot of companies transitioning to not just to ELNs, but digital systems, not just for meetings, but also how research is done. And it's a complex decision, or it's actually more than one decision, how to get started, what to do first, how to make right decisions, how to choose the right vendors. And I'm really excited to present to you our panelists, who I can say have done an extremely good job in the process, not only because they chose SciNote, but really they approach this in a really organized and systematic way. And SciNote may work for them, might not work for others on this webinar. That's okay. But the processes and the thoughts and thinking that they went through, I think it's really useful for everybody that's listening. Even if you decide on a different vendor, it's going to be really useful for you. So yeah, without further ado, just to introduce the panelists. So we have Jonas Kosten from NEUWAY Pharma. Jonas, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Clement. Hi, I'm happy to be in this webinar, and just a little bit about myself. So I'm a biophysicist by training, did my PhD in neuroscience, and this brought me to NEUWAY Pharma in Germany, and I've been there since 2018, and heading the bioanalytics department. And I was tasked maybe 1.5 years ago to find an electronic solution for our company.
Okay, thank you, Jonas. And the second person that we have today with us is Kyle Bushmin. Sorry, Kyle Bushmin from EnviroLogix. So yeah, Kyle, maybe pronounce your surname properly.
Good morning, good afternoon. Yes, my name is Kyle Boschman. Thank you, Clement, for the intro and the opportunity to speak today. So I'm going on 4 years senior scientist at EnviroLogix. Got my PhD at the University of Maine. So I've been pretty well an East Coaster for my whole life. But very excited today to talk about our recent implementation of SciNote and some of the thoughts and processes that we went through in both not only evaluating, but ultimately deploying that new solution to our R&D team.
Thanks, Kyle. So the reason we invited both Jonas and Kyle is just because our support team saw how well they approached this, and they were really excited to share the approaches used by both companies. And yeah, thank you guys so much for joining and for sharing your experiences. So before we get started, we will have one poll, so one question that we would like to ask you to answer. So you should see on your screen now the questions, and in the meantime, while you're deciding what to answer, I'll just share with you how today's webinar will look like. So as soon as we're done with the poll, we will first have Jonas present us 15 minutes how the selection process for the ELN looked like in their organization. We'll then have a couple of minutes to just ask Jonas any questions and have also Kyle's take on this, and then We'll do the same thing with Kyle, but Kyle will focus more on once the solution has been selected, what was the process of implementing that solution. Again, 15 minutes discussion. We'll have some replies from Jonas and myself. And then lastly, we will open up the discussion in the form of Q&A session where you'll be able to post your questions and we'll choose the ones that that are most relevant and ask Jonas and Kyle to answer them. So it should take all in all about 1 hour, and I believe we now have our answers. And yeah, without further ado, Jonas, please, the stage is yours.
1 second. Okay. Yeah, thank you again, Clement, to invite me to this webinar. I will first introduce you a little bit about the background of our company, about NEUWAY Pharma, to help understand what kind of work we do and also how this relates or what challenges we faced in selecting the ELN. We are a small biotech company focused on drug delivery. We're located in Bonn, Germany, have around currently 20 employees. And our core technology are engineered protein capsules, or ENPCs, which are protein capsules which can be used to package any kind of cargo, for instance, DNA or RNA, and deliver this cargo across the blood-brain barrier. And we do nearly all of the production and analytics and R&D in-house. So we have multiple teams, which you will see later, that we need to connect also in the documentation process. The status quo in our lab or in our company was mostly paper lab book, or let's say a combination of a paper lab book and some digital data that's produced. And I was tasked to identify and implement a digital solution. And one of the hopes they were vaguely in this area that we wanted to create a searchable database, hopefully find some hidden links in our data using some big data analysis, and save time in the process. I've divided my talk into basically 4 sections, which are also the steps we went through in selecting and doing the market research for an ELN. And the first one is really to identify what your lab needs, meaning you have to understand the workflow of your lab, how the current documentation process works, and identify already possibilities where the digital solution could fit in. The second part is the market research. In particular, if you are new to ELN, then you need to understand what the market actually offers, what features they have, and what you're basically going into. And these two are actually iterative. So if you understand the market better, you might need to analyze your lab in a different way to choose the best solution. And I will spend most of the time on the ELN selection process, where we started with a long list of candidates, narrowed it down to approximately 3 for in-depth testing, and then selected criteria how we could evaluate the best solution for us. And very shortly, I will talk about the implementation, which we started with a small group of people and then subsequently increased as the database filled. So I will start going into more detail on the first part. So the understanding of the status quo. And this means really to understand and to really know your processes. That means for the different teams, individual teams, but also how the different teams communicate, share experimental data or substances in that way. And for this, you of course need to talk to your colleagues. Then just going through a couple of details that you need to focus on, or that we focus on. is the format and the requirements of protocols, meaning are they, for instance, SOPs, the data generation, where data is generated, which step and in which format, the documentation, of course, so what goes into the digital lab book or in the paper lab book if you have it before, and what doesn't. That means some of the data might be already digital and in a sufficiently documented form. The review process, do you have a review process? The 4 eyes principle, who needs to see the data or the documentation at which point, and maybe who needs to sign it off. And then also think about the data analysis that's done across multiple experiments, or maybe even across your whole process, and how you would like to share the data and track it. What I also found that many of the instruments nowadays come already with some databases, so you need to think how to integrate those, or if you have any other digital system like a LIMS, how you would integrate this into the whole workflow with the ELN. And our observations was that we actually could divide our teams in mainly 3 categories that had very different or relatively different needs and demands. One is the standard production, which has very defined processes, defined set of analytical methods, use SOPs, of course, and generate data sets that are basically just growing, but don't really change in what goes in there and what doesn't. The documentation is also very standardized format, and in terms of collaboration, like the talk or the experimental collaboration between teams, they usually transfer the material and the QC data to other teams. So they are kind of on their own, more or less, but on a very strict standardized process. Then we have multiple teams that do R&D. They often have various protocols, use different methods or combination of methods, and resulting also in different data. And those are relatively or quite collaborative in their efforts, so data needs to be shared more frequently as opposed to standard production. And then there is the analytics department, so my field in the company, where we have a set of analytical methods that have specific SOPs, but we are part of different experiments of R&D, standard production, and so on. So it's more service-like. And as I said, we are dealing actually with a lot of instrument databases. Right, so the next part was to understand the market of ELNs. First, of course, is what are the cost of digital solutions in general. So if you do some research on general digital solutions, you will see that there are some document management systems that are in a different price category than ELNs, for instance. Then you look at the standard features of ELN. So what do most of them offer? Where do they differ? And then you can get a feeling about what is essential for you and which features are nice to have. So you can really start thinking about how you will represent your process inside the electronic lab notebook. And as I mentioned before, you can iterate between this market research and the status quo, the needs analysis. So how do you start this part, the market research? You can get recommendations from colleagues or friends also working in the industry. What are the standards? But you also find comparisons on the internet. Yes, and then you start contacting vendors to organize a demo. And what we found that in this demo, it's really useful to have as many of the final users as possible, and to really get their feedback at this early stage, which helps you in the pre-selection of the ELN. So for us, for instance, one of the more complicated ELNs was ruled out by the end users immediately. And it also helps to introduce the users or the team to the concept of ELNs in general. So it's kind of a bit of an expectation management. And it helps you to identify members for your testing team, which is, as you will see in the next slide, quite important. You can also create some test dummy data just for a brief understanding how you enter data or how data is displayed. But it's relatively brief. Now the real test comes in this slide, and I will walk you through step by step. So I will get to this more complicated part soon. So the first thing is, or what we did was a shortlist generation, and we used certain criteria which we called must-have that definitely need to be fulfilled. So this could be, for instance, the price, let's say, for 10,000 euros per year per 10 or 20 users. There are other must-have criteria for us, for instance, that we in the beginning needed an on-premise variant of an ELN, not a cloud version, or that you have a backup system. And this helps you to narrow down your list, your long list, to a couple of candidates, and then you can start assembling your testing team, ideally from different teams in your lab, so that they have a different perspective than yours, and you can initiate the test trial. And for the test trial, or what we did, we came up with criteria that are important for us. Some of them we could actually just derive from the product description already, and for others we needed really the in-depth testing. These features could be related to costs, for instance, the cost of the ELN or the hardware, some IT features, let's say backup, or how the migration to another database would be supported. Of course, very important, the regulatory compliance. And there it's of course also important to not only have the features ready, but also have some support on the validation process if you need to really validate your system. And then the kind of the fourth category are the ELN features. Yeah, I will show you a couple of those here. What we did then, we came up with this list, relatively long list of criteria, and we weighted them according to what is the most important for us, giving a 10 to the most important features we wanted and a 1 to the least important one. And this actually step is a good way, or a good step in which to involve the decision makers and discuss with them really, let's say the management, what the company needs, and hopefully find a consensus on how you score your criteria. And these criteria are then used for analyzing which is the best solution, and you then estimate them, basically each criteria, how good each ELN or each solution compares to the other one. If the winner gets basically 5 points and the worst gets 1 point, and then what you can do in this decision matrix, or what we did, is you then multiply the weight for each solution with the rank, and you end up for each criterion with a score. And when you sum up all these scores, you get a nice quantitative evaluation which ELN or which solution fits the best for you. And what you see here is we included actually also the status quo in the analysis, which is really important to first justify that you moving to a digital solution, and then also identify areas where you will improve. And as you can also see here from the scores, the paper and lab book combinations really were in our case worse than the ELNs. Okay, so that was the selection process, and for this whole ranking, what you do, you really need in-depth testing. So here's really where you spend most of the time at, or where we spend most of the time at, and we did the in-depth testing of 3 solutions. Finally selected the best of those for us, and here are some of the best practices we derived in encouraging the successful implementation in our company. One thing is find good examples of users, because this helps you to get more people on board and maybe even involve other users in the training. This I mentioned before, you have to fill the database. The more the data there is inside, the more useful does it get. Just also for us meant that we prioritize data that is useful for most users, for instance, protocols or inventories of the samples or the reagents we use. I think for me, one important thing was to keep up to date with the implementation progress, both on an organizational level, so where did the whole process stand, and on a technical level. So if your teams are that different, you need to help to find them solutions for representing their processes optimally in the ELN. And from the management point, it's very advisable to involve the leaders in the implementation, the team leaders, and set deadlines for certain milestones or for the complete transition. Yeah, and that's the end of my presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jonas, for this. Jonas has been kind enough to share with us an empty Excel spreadsheet that you've seen that they used for evaluation. So everybody in this webinar will have a chance to download it and we'll send it to you over email as well, so that you have that. I think it's a really great way to do this, and I think it's really important. And a lot of customers we see, they do the list, but they don't do the weights, which I think is really important. And it requires you to have like a really honest conversation within the team. What's really important. But yeah, my question, Jonas, would be, so you really encapsulated well all the technical parts, but did you take into account any of the, let's say, soft factors? Like, I don't know, that maybe one ELN would get higher score or slightly higher score, but the other ones, like, I don't know, people felt closer to or something. Was there room for this?
I have to say, fortunately, our kind of emotional choice matched very well with the score. And I think that was also the consequence of really asking people for the testing group for each of the criteria, how they felt about this and what was really the best solution. So if you break it down on this kind of micro level, yeah, people understand their decisions better. That's at least our experience.
Okay, so basically, if it overlaps, then it means that the weights were set up properly, right?
Exactly, yeah.
All right, Kyle, do you have anything to add, or was it did you go through the similar process?
We did go through a similar process, but I've got to say, Jonas, this is fantastic. It's very in-depth. I love the formality of it, and it's a great standard work document for other organizations to leverage, which is just a great offering to the community. I did have a follow-up question similar to what Clement had said, and admittedly, it's a tricky thing to codify or apply a value to, but I was curious if you took into account or even had discussions internally about things, some of those softer values like customer support. So personally, one of the things I've been really impressed with from SciNote has been their customer service team. Of course, you don't always know that until you get into working with a company a little more closely. But I was curious if you had considered that or had some discussions around, how do we value customer support, and then how do we evaluate a given ELN's ability to provide that support?
Yeah, I mean, myself, I choose to be kind of the connection to SciNote to the customer support, and also help the people in the onboarding. So this was basically just for me to decide if I'm happy with the support. And since our lab is mostly German, also language-wise, it was I think the right thing to do. So we didn't really evaluate on a user-by-user base if they're happy with the support, but yeah, probably I took this into account, but not in the metrics.
Thanks, Jonas. I appreciate that. And then I just wanted to add as well, I really like the landscape that your tool provides, right? So even the comparison to, say, a paper notebook, you often, there are people that just tend to favor that approach. And I think this is a great tool for really showcasing, yes, there may be no cost, for instance, with a paper notebook, but look at all the value that you're leaving on the table by avoiding a digital solution. So fantastic presentation, and thanks again for sharing that document.
Yeah, thanks.
I couldn't agree more with Kyle. I think this was really great that you actually took the status quo into consideration, because some people just, yeah, it's hard to compare apples to apples sometimes when you think about paper, but when you really go down to, you know, what are your requirements, you're going to have to choose one system over another. So you should be able to compare. So really great. I see some questions already coming up. We will get to those in the last part of the talk, but keep writing them. So we'll go through all of them if we have time. If not, we'll answer them via email. So you'll get the answer one way or another. As I said, like we will make the spreadsheet also available on our webpage. So I think it's a fantastic piece of content, and you know, it's something when it comes from the customer and it worked from them. This is something that's yeah, as good as it gets. All right, so Kyle, then if you can take us through your presentation. So Kyle kind of starts where Jonas ends in terms of implementation. So yeah, Kyle, the stage is yours.
Thank you again, Clement. So hopefully everybody is seeing my slides now. Yeah, so really we focused in this presentation on exactly that, the implementation process. We had already kind of decided that we were excited about SciNote, but we really, you know, we have a very diverse R&D team, lots of levels of understanding. And so we wanted to really try to capture some of those learnings from the experience of transitioning to SciNote over the past several months. So a little bit about EnviroLogix. Who are we? Essentially, we're a relatively small biotech company, but we are a global leader in the development of rapid mycotoxin and GMO detection technologies. We've serviced the food chain industry for over 25 years with a focus on innovation and customer support. And I really can't stress enough how much the customer vision and the voice of the customer drives our product development and ability to service the industry. We really try to keep a close, intimate relationship with our customer base, and I think that's really important in understanding how to meet the needs of your individual customer, which I'll gladly say that SciNote is excellent at doing as well. So what do we provide? You know, what do we do at EnviroLogix? We focus on offering detection testing solutions across a broad range of customer needs. We provide different products and technologies for mostly for decision point testing all along the food chain. So we have many different customers as well. Their individual needs are varied as well. And we also offer lab services, so internal testing to support the higher throughput, and also customers interested in outsourcing or bundling their testing needs. Now, digging in a little bit more to the specifics around actually implementing SciNote, transitioning to that new ELN. First and foremost, you know, you can't have a conversation today without avoid the big white elephant in the room of COVID, right? So we've all learned through 2020 that it's now no longer as simple as getting 12 people in a room and hashing out how we're going to complete a process. It's now, you know, we're all forced to leverage technology. And I think if anything, this is a perfect opportunity to do exactly that. In the wake of 2020, you know, taking hold of things like Teams, Zoom, Google Meets, the ability to communicate through audio and visual methodologies at absolutely lightning fast pace and across different time zones, et cetera, I think is incredibly important. One of the most important things that we ended up doing as a result of these training sessions were to record the training, which was incredibly useful. For instance, there's a number of users who specifically pointed out that those recordings allow them the ability to kind of troubleshoot on their own. So some people tend to learn better by watching somebody complete a process and then going back and trying to do it themselves. So we had a lot of feedback that was a solid approach. And alternatively, there's a really nice key component to recordings that's often just kind of forgotten about. And that's the fact that it captures every critical detail necessary to complete a workflow. So for instance, especially in a digital environment where, you know, the wrong click of a button, the wrong web page, the wrong specific detail impacts so much the ultimate success of completing that workflow. Having a recording where you can watch somebody specifically follow each step and then replicate that on your own, I think is just extremely powerful. The other thing that I wanted to point out, Jonas had just commented that he's created himself as the portal, so the kind of customer support contact right between his team and the SciNote team. I think that is critical. I did comment that SciNote has a fantastic customer support team, but I think also internally within your own organization, make yourself available, become the subject matter expert on the new ELN that you plan to implement, understand it as intimately as you possibly can, and then you have that much more ability to communicate effectively to your team. So as great as SciNote support is, you know your own internal organization the best, and so it's useful to be a conduit to help navigate that conversation as well. And I also wanted to point out as well, I'll admit this one came from Vid. So we have an R&D team that is greater than 20 people, and right off the bat, he recommended, you know, for larger teams, we like to do multiple sessions. It's a small point, but I can't recommend that enough. Not only did we have users that attended both sessions anyways, as a way to reinforce the training, but just scheduling alone became a real challenge for larger teams. So offering multiple training sessions as well as recording them really expanded the impact of the training overall. So moving into, Clement uses this term soft skills or soft abilities. I like to think of our team in a similar way, right? So there are different levels, different responsibilities, there are different personalities even. And so each individual on our team, to me, represents a specific person, not just a, you know, blank user that we're trying to get on board, but somebody who we want to get actively engaged and excited about using the new software, the new system. So we have, you know, we are largely an R&D lab. We have peripheral departments to support that structure overall as well. But even within just R&D, we have interns and technicians. They're often focused on completing and executing standard daily work. We have lab scientists that are more tactical and maybe a little more collaborative. We have technical leads who really get more into the project management. And so they're very active in the lab, but also involved in reporting up visual management to senior leadership. And then we have scientific managers who ultimately drive program management and are looking for, you know, the visual dashboards, looking at multiple programs or projects over time, timelines, and then the ability to dive into the data supporting those conclusions and timelines as well. So there's a broad range of visibility, accessibility, and interactability that each of these levels really requires to be successful in their position. Another point I wanted to make here as well. So it's really important, pay attention to the pain points. Jonas mentioned going through the initial demos with not just SciNote, but other ELN, you know, you go through those initial demo sessions. Listen specifically to the pain points from your team. That I can't stress enough how important that is, because you'll never convince people to adopt a process that they walk into with some grudge, right? If there's something preventing them from really wanting to adopt the process, you're fighting an uphill battle at that point. So try to understand specifically what are the pain points that impact efficiency or engagement for your team today, and how will the next implementation, your next ELN, how will they attempt to alleviate that for your team. So finally, moving more into those soft skills. Again, so long time ago, I was very much focused on biopsychology, neuropsychology, ironically enough, Jonas. So you know, to me, behavior drives so very much of what we do. And there really are, at a very broad stroke, generally a couple types of people, right? We have very creative thinkers. We tend to call them right-brained people. We have very logical thinkers that we tend to call left-brained people. And really to enable both types of people to be successful, we want to give creative thinkers, showcase them the value of how you can use this collaboratively, how can you work outside the box in your current workflow while still documenting, what you're doing in the lab and feeding that visual management up the chain. Customization is huge for creative thinkers. So often any sort of system that creates too many walls can be a problem. That's one thing I love about SciNote. For instance, inventories. You build the inventory as you want it to be, right? So you can add however many columns you want and layer in your sort of the linkage between those inventories to different tasks. And so it's that kind of customization that really empowers this from an R&D perspective to allow more tactical scientists to utilize the tool to their fullest extent. More logical thinkers are often focused on standardization, right? So daily management, daily standard work, importing an SOP, showing the completion of that SOP, updating the timeline, that sort of thing. And so as much as we don't want to build too many walls to shy away from people who are more creative, there needs to be some level of organization that does create some structure to drive efficiency, because ultimately for those left brain thinkers, it likely is about efficiency and making sure the task is complete as opposed to driving through this much more colorful landscape. So I really want to stress this a lot. Jonas did a great job focusing on the specifics of how you would choose an ELN. And I think, again, it was a fantastic intro to that process. Once your team is ready to adopt your new ELN, be very intimately aware of each individual user. How can you meet their specific needs? How can you help them be successful? And that should certainly go into, if there are any glaring issues that you could foresee, that should go into your process at the front end, thinking about evaluating your ELNs as well. So finally, this is sort of post-implementation. Once you've gotten people on board, you want to avoid backtrack, right? So you want to avoid sliding down that slope where you've built a nice process, but people are slowly not using it as much as you'd like. There's some of that adoption sort of attrition that occurs. And so to me, the most value driver that can keep people engaged is to just showcase the value, right? So people may come to you with everyday challenges or gripes or complaints about a process that seems inefficient. If you can find a way to improve that efficiency through the use of the ELN, it's incredible how quickly people will get excited about using that tool and go from not wanting to touch it to adamantly use it every single day. It can be really transformative, especially once people fully understand how this is going to impact their workflow on a day-to-day basis. So for us, embedded Office tools, PowerPoint, Excel were huge. From a management, so scientific managers perspective, this is, the difference between being able to look at a project level, evaluate data, not modify, but look at data in a preview and be able to back out, move back and forth between different PowerPoints or Excel docs, I think is huge. That is far more efficient than pulling all those documents down and now opening them individually and looking at them locally. So embedded Office is just a huge seller, massive value to our team, and definitely has been driving its implementation with us. Another one was inventory management. So this is, as a decade plus scientist in general, the inventory management is key. Organization is a massive value add to me. And so this one, again, is really implemented perfectly in SciNote. It's customizable. It remains flexible enough that our more discovery-focused R&D teams find use out of it. But at the same time, you can standardize it. You can make it very rigid so that, for instance, Jonas mentioned a production team. We don't currently our production team does not use SciNote currently, but if we wanted to merge them into the process, it's built very well to do precisely that, to have more rigor, more standardization, and create different workflows that are more amenable to, say, a production environment than, say, an R&D environment. Also, another huge value add to me, I live and die by my calendar. I probably would have missed my wedding day if it wasn't on the calendar. So the calendar view and the dashboard, the task dashboard are huge. I mean, to have a visual sense of what's happening over the course of the week, over the course of the month, to have indicators showing when those tasks are upcoming or past due, and then to also have that list, that again, color-coded list of specifically what have I avoided, or maybe not avoided, but missed. Maybe there were a few items last week, small tasks that just fell between the cracks. I'd never happened to pick them up and get to them, but thankfully they're right at the top of my task list. And I know come Monday morning, say that these need to be addressed immediately, very visible, very easy to deal with. And so again, huge efficiency driver. This was less about customization, much more about just driving efficiency. I no longer have to navigate 100 to-do items. I can simply look through the SciNote dashboard and right away know exactly what I need to tackle for the day. So these were some of the largest value adds for us. Thank you very much all for your time. I really appreciate all your time today, not only the panelists and SciNote for giving me the opportunity to speak, but also all the people that have joined the webinar as well. It can be a challenging and daunting task to transition between ELNs. And I would encourage anybody to, as Jonas pointed out, develop that intimacy with your team, understand what they need, their role, their job requirements, their personalities, understand them on an individual basis, and then go back and really survey the landscape of ELNs and understand, use Jonas's tool to understand how can we best leverage what would be most useful for our team, keeping in mind cost, functionality, that sort of thing. So thank you all. I'm happy to follow up with any comments, questions, and yeah, thanks again. Appreciate it. You're muted, Clem. Clement, you're muted.
Sorry about this. Thank you, Kyle, so much. So I'll have a couple of questions now for Kyle, but in the meantime, if you have your questions, this is a great time now to post them in the Q&A box. It's at the bottom of the screen. We have a couple of questions already, and we'll get to them in a minute. Before I ask you a question, Kyle, I just want to say that I cannot stress or I cannot agree enough with Kyle with what was said. It's so critical to get the buy-in from the whole team. We've seen with customers that were really excited, but then they didn't include the team or some parts of the team, or especially, as soon as you have more than one person, their levels of excitement are going to be different. And some people, just tend to ignore let's say the less excited ones, and then as Kyle said, it's going to be an uphill battle. So I think this is really important. Jonas already mentioned it, including the team in the decision-making process. This is also critical, showing them already, look how much value we are missing with paper. I think this is really critical. Getting them to the table, hear their voices, and as Kyle said, showing them value. Why is this going to make life better for them? I think it's absolutely critical. I heard once an idea, I believe it was in one of the big pharmaceutical companies, that they struggled with this and they implemented something they said worked really well. So Kyle, I wanted to ask you if you were thinking about this or even did this. So they they started new roles, you would be a technician, but also you would be, let's say, software specialist or software manager for a specific software. So this would be then part of your yearly review. You would probably get a raise for this as well. So they really included this also as an opportunity for personal growth, let's say. So what do you think of this idea? Is this something you've tried implementing?
So I think if I understand you correctly, Clement, it seems like an interesting idea. So are you saying this would be something an organization would implement internally to create different user levels within SciNote?
No, no. To motivate users to, rather than being in opposition, that they would be actively, they would actively hold the responsibility with making sure the software is running smoothly and so on.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess I could, I could offer the same sort of similar thing that Jonas had said. So I'm in a current position where I'm sort of the liaison as well, and I do think it's really important to have somebody in that position. We have, a corporate IT department as well as a local IT support specialist, but they're often, to your point, Clement, you want somebody that's very software specific, right? So just having an IT specialist is going to lose the impact of how the data itself matters and what your team needs and all the details around that. I think having somebody who not only understands the organization's team, has a good working relationship with the ELN, or in this case with SciNote, and then ultimately understands the system itself, is really critical. I think you need to have somebody in that role to really best support the needs of your team.
Okay. Jonas, how did your implementation compare to Kyle's?
I think Kyle mentioned a lot of things that we also observed, and it's funny actually in the slide where you showed the value, you also mentioned the Excel implementation, because one of the more resistant users in our team were totally blown away by using the Excel feature to do a live graph of a growth curve. I can also only stress this, that if you're the expert, and which you probably are after you completed this whole selection process, you can actually find value for your team, and you need to do this. It doesn't stop after the selection, and will not work on its own. And so I think it's a really nice approach Kyle did. I also think it was a great idea with the recordings. We didn't do that. I maybe have to think about this, because I just repeated everything for everyone personally. So that's great.
Okay.
I've maybe, if I may, one question for you, Kyle. So you mentioned that you basically have some creative people that need more freedom, let's say, and some more which need standardized procedures. How much flexibility do you actually give or gave your users in designing or using SciNote? Because there is some flexibility how you can use the different hierarchies and the inventories, right?
Yep. So we mostly addressed it, I shouldn't say cross-functionally, but within the team. So it was discussed. We had sort of a testing, as you pointed out, we had like a test team, and it was discussed within that team how we would organize the data structure of SciNote with the recent launch of the highest level of data structure. I think that was very helpful to us, because when we first came on board, we were actually looking for exactly that additional level. We just had that first starting level, and it was a little compacted from what we were coming from. We were used to having more levels, and so that additional layer really gave us the ability to be far more flexible. We tend to, internally, we track formal projects with a very formal coding system, and then informal projects just far more informally. And that layer gave us the ability to split them out now. So you can have very formal new product development projects that are tracked within SciNote, as well as far less standardized project folders. And the nice part is that because you can add that coding, a scientific manager that's going to come along and say, I'm here to look at this formal project X and also informal project Y, they can easily navigate to either of those projects without getting lost or confused by which data goes with which project. But that is a great question. I mean, especially to your point, breaking into production teams, analytical teams, you have to keep in mind your internal processes. And I think that's a really great point that you made, Jonas. It's not just what SciNote or another ELN can provide, right? But it's how do you represent your processes within the ELN? And I think that is a critical question to be asking yourself and your team as you move forward evaluating any given ELN.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more, and it's what we see just statistically. People that because we offer all our new customers a workshop, essentially what Kyle was mentioning with Vid, where they do the mapping of processes, and we see the adoption of companies that do this or don't do this is huge. It's a huge difference, and yeah, this is the critical part, because every ELN is going to come with some level of flexibility, and you're going to need to do some level of mapping, essentially, your processes to the software. All right, so last question from my side, and we'll address then questions from the audience. So. Kyle, you switched from another ELN to SciNote. How painful was this?
It actually wasn't painful at all. Certainly, so getting on board with SciNote was not all that challenging. The things I described in my presentation really speak to the major challenges we faced. It's all around training and then following implementation, that follow-up and encouragement, getting the stickiness of using the system, so to speak. So really, the coming on board with SciNote was not a great challenge. As an anecdote, the previous provider, we have had some challenges getting our data in the correct format we wanted. So as just a side note, keep that in mind. If you're looking to pull data if you're looking to transition from another ELN, keep in mind that formatting of that data could be vastly different between both ELNs, and there's going to be an interim repository of you, the organization, in the middle. So that can be a little bit of a complex process. It's, if you have solid IT support, it hasn't been overly challenging. It's just taking time, really, is the biggest thing. But in terms of getting on board with SciNote, that really hasn't been challenging at all. Understanding the team's need, doing your initial evaluation that Jonas walked through so nicely, and then ultimately making your decision. That's probably the greater amount of time, deciding who you want to select for an ELN. And then the actual training process, we pushed it along a little quickly. We were getting towards the end of 2020 and wanted to wrap things up. So I think Vid kept sort of saying, "Are you sure you want to move this quickly?" But that's how we do it in New England. So, but no, it really went quite smoothly, and really no complaints or any sort of technical challenges.
Okay. We have a couple of similar questions that we started to talk now about. So, like Sarah is asking, like, how to get the data from paper to ELN. Similar, like, how do you get data from other systems? So maybe, like, my question would be, did you import or did you try bringing historic data into SciNote when you started with it, or you started sort of with a clean slate and said, okay, we'll keep the system, the data how it was before, and just start with new projects? Maybe Jonas, you can start.
So I mean, for test purposes, we included or imported some data because it gave us the choice of trying out different things. But then we started with a deadline or a date where we said, okay, we make a cut at this date, and then everything goes into the digital solution or in the ELN, and the rest you will find in the paper notebooks. And for us, this worked really nicely because different people had different paces, let's say. The only requirement, or I think the most important requirement, is that you keep a note when you switched. So you can say, okay, until this date, I need to look into the paper notebook or wherever you keep your data before, and then you switch to the ELN. Maybe in the future, if we have a lot of time, we can enter old data, but the experience is that it's hard to find the time for this. Maybe you need an external company, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. And then another question that we get, sorry, Kyle, how was it? How was it for you? Did you stop at a certain point, or did you manage to import all the data from the other vendor to SciNote?
So we took a very similar approach. We essentially had a cut point and a clean slate when we started with SciNote. We have discussed backfilling previous data, but again, Jonas is spot on. It tends to fall to the bottom of the list in terms of priority. Unless there's a really critical need to get that data imported, it's archived in the meantime somewhere, and it's sort of cached in its own system. And so it hasn't been a great priority to backfill that data to this point.
Okay, yeah, I think this is a really important point because a lot of people see this as a big hurdle going forward. But we've seen with a lot of customers that, okay, there are some specifics, but a lot of customers just don't need that. As long as they have access to historic data, it's then much less of a hassle to move to such system. Okay,
maybe I can add.
Sorry, Jonas.
Yeah, maybe I can add one thing, specifically to SciNote. What we included from historical data were old batches in the inventory. So the inventories really are easy for importing old data quickly from Excel sheets. So there it really makes sense. In terms of protocols, we didn't do that, but inventories, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. And this is also, we have a question like how difficult is to get data into SciNote. If it's inventories, if it's repositories, if you have spreadsheets, then that's fairly easy to import. If you have protocols in PDFs, that's going to take more time. So it really depends on your data, but at least some historic data should be fairly easy to import. Okay, one question that we get a lot, and I believe Jonas, you actually started with one and then switched to the other. So what's your thought on cloud versus local? So Jonas, I believe you started with local and then went to cloud. So can you share a little bit what was your thinking?
Yeah, I think it's a bit a question of the philosophy, and let's say our company in general was skeptical when it comes to having the data not like physically in our company, but during the COVID crisis, we got more used to the digital forms and were then also more comfortable switching the whole SciNote instance to the cloud. And I think as we've seen in the last week with this Microsoft server, Exchange server issue or hack, actually also your local storage is not safe or safer than the cloud. It's probably currently the other way around. I mean, if you have a big provider like Amazon, they probably take care that it's difficult to hack or lose data, right?
Yeah, and faster to update. So if you have a cloud-based software, as soon as, like, for example, we see it often here, especially after releases, we see that maybe there is a bug or maybe there is some vulnerability, so we can update and push this update really quickly. Whereas if it's local installation, we have to get in touch and coordinate. So it's I can attest to this as well. Yeah. Kyle, you are cloud-based, right? How's that working?
Yes, we are. And I would agree exactly with what Jonas is saying, especially nowadays, vulnerabilities have changed anyways. And I agree, it is a philosophy-driven decision. But personally, I would recommend, not necessarily avoiding a cloud solution based on a security concern. Okay.
All right, I'll merge two interesting questions, which I think are along the similar parallel. So one question is, how did you score the ease of use of an ELN? Because it's kind of a personal question, and I think this ties in really well with the question, how do you address the needs of analytical versus R&D? So what we hear very often is that R&D people like the flexibility, they like to do things every day differently, whereas the analytical or people that are more in the production side of things, they like to have more structure, more rigidity. So how do you then evaluate this? How do you bring the groups of those people together? Kyle, maybe you can start here.
Sure. So in our case, we really kind of captured this. Again, we didn't use a nice tool like Jonas has shared, but we captured this in our internal testing conversations. So it was once we had gone through the demo and we actually had access to the demo session of SciNote, people were given a week, 2 weeks to kind of evaluate the software and then come back to the table with their own personal input. So although we didn't codify or specifically apply a numeric value to that, we certainly did capture all of those findings right up front before we actually proceeded with implementing the new system.
Okay, Jonas?
Yeah, if you have some criteria that, or multiple criteria that capture this point, it gives you a more solid ground on or getting the feeling from different people. If you only have one criteria, I would say you can just make a decision, or how do you say, make a survey amongst your testing group. What is the best solution of the 5? This is the nice thing with using the criteria. You can make a ranking, actually, how much better is the one solution than the other. And I mean, what is also important then is that your group represents your company. If you only have analytical people in your testing group, you're probably missing a lot of the important decision makers, or the important user types, as Carl also showed in his presentation. So, yeah.
Okay. And maybe something we touched on to some extent, but I want to comment, like there are a couple of questions asking about the data transfer between different ELN vendors, standardization, and so forth. So this is something that is not just frustrating for science, but for me personally and our team as well. We have been very active with SciNote to bring forth a standard of exchange. We actually created a .eln file format that we open sourced. There we talked to quite a few of our competitors. The good news is that they all seem to share, not all, but most of them share this and want to work together. We have even attracted some funding for bringing this forward, and I was actually a mentor for a master thesis in Hochschule Bildau in Germany to a student just last year. And he did the thesis on standardization across ELN platforms. So there is movement in this direction. There is interest from, let's say, all parties. The bad news is that it's very early on, and it will probably be several years before we are there, to be honest. So it's moving, but it's moving slowly. All right, looking at the time, maybe we have just time for one last question. What would you say? So I think this encompasses a couple of questions. So what would you say is the? So why would you say to somebody? What's the main reason in one sentence for using an ELN? Jonas, you can go first.
I think this creation of a searchable database and everything that comes with it, standardization, regulatory compliance, I think it's really creating a database, and the form in the end maybe it's not important so much. Once you started moving the paperwork into a database, then you, I think, already did the biggest step.
Okay.
I couldn't agree more. The traceability is the very first thing that comes to mind. Traceability and visibility. So just the ability, like Jonas is saying, to create a database that now is not just a large library of notebooks that physically lives in one location, but is accessible from virtually anywhere in the world in as great detail as it would have existed in the paper notebook. So that's hands down the utility, is just the accessibility and traceability of your data.
Okay. All right. Great. So I think that's it for today. There are a couple of questions still coming in. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. We will reply to all of them individually per email, so you'll get the answers. I want to thank again Jonas and Kyle for joining and sharing this. This is I was really excited about this webinar, and I hope that the audience appreciates this as well. I think this was extremely useful. So really thank you. Thank you to all to everybody who took the time off from this beautiful spring day to join us and talk about this. Yeah, thanks again for joining, and have a great day. Jonas, Kyle, yeah, if you want to say your goodbyes.
Yeah, thanks for listening. I wish you good luck, and think you can benefit very much from having an ELN. Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Well said, Jonas. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you, everybody, and see you in the next webinar. Bye-bye.